Sorry, ma'am. We're going with someone who better fits the company image. The HR manager's voice was even, rehearsed. Her eyes flicked toward the scarf at Elena Marshall's neck, the one barely hiding the pale scar that traced beneath her jaw. Elena said nothing. No protest. No plea. She simply nodded, gathered her folder, and walked out with the same quiet grace she once used to carry wounded soldiers through fire. What they didn't see was who she really was. And what they didn't know was that the man she had once dragged from the wreckage, half conscious and bleeding, now wore 4 stars on his shoulder and had a direct line to the Pentagon switchboard. 15 minutes later, he called. And when he spoke, everything changed. They never saw her back then, 25 years old, dust in her teeth, sweat on her skin, boots worn from miles of desert heat. In the summer of 2007, Specialist Elena Marshall wasn't just a medic. She was the pulse line for every man in Bravo Unit 3, stationed near Kirkuk, Iraq. The morning the IED hit was blistering, 120 degrees before noon. The convoy was 3 Humvees deep, running a supply route they'd driven a dozen times before. Routine, they called it, but nothing in war stays routine for long. The explosion didn't roar. It cracked, sharp and violent, like the sky itself had split open. The lead vehicle flipped, its undercarriage blooming fire. Metal and dirt rained down. Screams followed. Chaos always does. Elena didn't wait. She didn't look to the sergeant. She didn't flinch. She threw open the back door of her Humvee and ran toward the blast. Helmet tight, medkit slung over her shoulder, heart pounding like a war drum. The wreckage was twisted, blackened. Smoke coiled out like snakes from every jagged crevice. One man was already crawling out, blood streaming down his arm. Another was pinned, his leg crushed, breathing shallow. But it was the third soldier that made her stop cold. The name on his chest plate read Dwyer. Colonel Marcus Dwyer, the commanding officer, the man whose orders carried weight all the way back to Baghdad. Now, half conscious, slumped against the twisted frame, blood soaking through his sleeve and pant leg. A chunk of shrapnel the size of a quarter had torn straight through his shoulder and embedded into his thigh, and he was fading, fast. She dropped beside him, hands steady. "Stay with me, sir," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke and fear. "You hear me? You stay awake." He nodded weakly, eyes barely focused. Elena opened her medkit and worked without hesitation. She packed the wound on his shoulder, twisted a tourniquet high on his leg, and slid gauze under the collar of his flak jacket. But then, before she could speak again, came the second blast. It didn't hit them directly. It hit behind, somewhere near the support truck. But it sent shards of metal soaring, and one of them caught her throat. Elena dropped to one knee, gasping. Warm blood slid down her neck into the collar of her uniform. Her hands went to her throat on instinct, and she felt the tear, long, jagged, burning. But she didn't scream, didn't fall. With one hand clutched to her own neck, and the other still pressing down on Dwyer's bleeding wound, she whispered through blood and grit, "You're not dying here. Not today." By the time the medevac bird came down, Elena had stabilized 3 men, including Dwyer, and refused treatment until the last soldier was loaded. Only then did she collapse into the chopper floor. At the field hospital, doctors worked quickly. The shrapnel had lacerated her vocal cords. Surgery could save her life, but not her voice. When they told her she'd never speak the same again, Elena nodded. She didn't cry. She just asked, "Can I still serve?" They said no. Her war was over. But what no one knew, not the doctors, not the colonel she saved, not even Elena herself, was that her real fight hadn't even begun. When Elena Marshall returned home, the silence hit harder than the blast. There were no parades, no cameras, no welcome banners flapping in the wind, just the low hum of a city that had moved on without her. She arrived in Charlotte with a duffel bag, a stitched throat, and a voice that rasped like dry leaves on concrete. Every word she spoke scratched its way out, uneven, soft, forever altered. But she was alive, and that had to count for something. She applied for jobs immediately, anything with structure, something that made sense. Receptionist, office assistant, front desk clerk. On paper, she was more than qualified, decorated service record, medals for bravery, field medical training. But in interview after interview, faces shifted the moment she spoke. Some leaned in uncomfortably. Others blinked too often. A few just ended the conversation early with polite phrases like, "We'll be in touch," or "We found a candidate who better fits the team dynamic." Elena knew what they meant. She didn't sound right. She didn't look polished. Once, at a job fair for veterans, a recruiter from a mid-sized marketing firm told her, "You have strong credentials, but we do a lot of phone work. Our clients might struggle to understand you." She nodded and thanked him anyway. He looked relieved when she walked away. At night, she stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, whispering phrases into the stillness. "Thank you for calling. My name is Elena. I understand your concern." Each line was a battle against her own body. Breath control, tension, patience. Some nights, her voice gave out before her determination did. Still, she didn't quit. She found part-time work at a veteran shelter downtown. Not glamorous, but real. She served meals, organized donation drives, and, more than anything, listened. The men and women who came through the doors weren't broken, just waiting to be seen again. Some carried visible scars, others hid them under sleeves in silence. Elena never asked. She just handed them clean clothes or a warm plate and said softly, "You're not alone." In time, the shelter's director noticed her empathy, how she could calm a shouting vet with 2 sentences, or mediate a dispute over bunk assignments without raising her voice. One day he pulled her aside and asked, "Have you ever considered HR? You'd be a natural." It sounded absurd at first, HR, her, but she thought about it. Conflict resolution, advocacy, equity. Maybe it wasn't just about hiring. Maybe it was about healing systems from the inside out. She enrolled in night classes at a community college, human resources management. 4 courses a semester, textbooks borrowed, tuition covered by the GI Bill. She tutored other disabled vets during the day, helped file benefit claims, and studied case law at night under a flickering kitchen light. Her apartment was small, her couch secondhand, and her coffee always reheated, but her drive never faded. She passed every exam with distinction. Her professors remembered her for her thoughtfulness, her precision, and the way she never let her damaged voice interrupt her clarity. One day, during a seminar on workplace bias, a guest lecturer asked the class to define professional presence. A few students mentioned posture, tone, eye contact. Elena raised her hand, slowly, deliberately. When called on, she said, "It's not how you sound, it's what you stand for." Her voice cracked on the last word, but the room stayed silent for a moment, listening, really listening. And in that moment, Elena realized something. She might never reclaim the voice she once had, but maybe, just maybe, she could help others find theirs. The glass doors of Halston Dynamics slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a polished lobby bathed in natural light. Chrome accents, ferns and concrete planters, a receptionist who smiled just enough. Elena Marshall stood tall, her gray coat buttoned neatly, a slim folder tucked beneath her arm. She wore modest heels, slacks, and a soft teal scarf that brushed just under her jawline. Her voice had warmed up that morning. She'd practiced, paused between phrases, hydrated, breathed deep. She was ready. This was her 3rd interview in 2 months. But Halston was different. The company's mission statement read like something she'd write herself. People-first leadership, inclusion with intention, supporting transition from military to civilian life. They even had a partnership with a veteran hiring program. Elena had studied their core values until she could recite them in her sleep. At exactly 10:00 a.m., a young woman in a blazer stepped into the lobby. "Elena Marshall?" Elena smiled and rose. "That's me." "Great. Follow me." They entered a conference room on the 2nd floor. Glass walls, brushed aluminum table, and 3 people already waiting. A sharp-featured woman in her 40s with an immaculate bun and a pin that read, "People Ops Director, Shelley." A younger man in rolled-up sleeves, likely a project lead, and a bright-eyed HR associate, barely out of college. Introductions were brief. Elena shook each hand with calm precision and sat. The interview began smoothly. They asked about her experience mediating disputes at the shelter. She answered with a specific story about diffusing tension between two veterans with PTSD. They asked about recruitment strategy. She referenced coursework and real-world experience with resume workshops for female vets. Every answer was grounded, articulate, intentional. Her voice, raspy, yes, but steady and composed. But then it happened. Shelley's eyes flicked to the scarf, not directly. Just a glance, a pause. The way someone might notice a crack in a window and try not to stare. Elena felt it, that subtle shift, the air thickening, the rhythm breaking. The next question came slower. And how do you handle front-facing interactions? With clients? I believe in preparation, Elena replied calmly. Understanding client needs beforehand helps ensure that delivery is confident and clear, no matter the voice behind it. She smiled after saying it. Not a defensive smile, an earned one. The associate looked down. The project lead adjusted his watch. Shelley didn't smile back. Instead, she nodded sharply and closed the folder in front of her. Well, she said, we really do appreciate your time, your service, truly. Elena knew what was coming, but she waited. Shelley continued, we're a very brand-conscious company. This position has a strong external component. Client presentations, public-facing panels. First impressions, well, they matter. Elena met her eyes. Are you saying my appearance is a problem? Shelley kept her tone neutral. We just want someone who fits the culture, someone who reflects a modern, polished image for our clients. No one spoke after that. The associate pretended to reread her notes. The project lead cleared his throat. The silence wasn't long, but it stretched. Elena stood, smoothed the front of her coat. Thank you for the opportunity, she said softly. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but not from emotion, from effort. She extended a hand. Only the associate shook it. Downstairs, she passed the receptionist again. Two junior employees whispered behind the counter. One chuckled. Elena didn't stop. She walked past them, through the sliding doors into the cold light of morning. She stood on the sidewalk a moment, blinking into the wind. Her scarf fluttered just enough to reveal the scar beneath. Clean, pale, curved like a question mark. She didn't cover it. She adjusted her grip on the folder and stepped forward, boots tapping against concrete. She had walked through fire. She could walk through this. But what she didn't know, what no one inside that office knew, was that someone had been watching. And the most important part of her story hadn't even begun. Rachel Linwood wasn't supposed to be in the hallway that morning. The 19-year-old intern had been heading back from the break room, a cardboard tray of coffees balanced carefully in her hands, when she passed the glass conference room on the second floor. She wasn't eavesdropping. Not at first. But something in the room, maybe the tone, maybe the stillness, made her pause just long enough to hear the last exchange. Someone who fits the culture, said Shelley's voice. Calm, dismissive. Rachel froze. Through the glass, she saw the woman, Elena Marshall, rising from her seat. Her scarf had shifted slightly, revealing a pale scar that curved from beneath her ear to the base of her throat. The look on Elena's face wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was something Rachel couldn't name, something worn and dignified, like stone shaped by years of wind. Rachel stepped back. The coffees trembled in her tray. She didn't know Elena personally, but she recognized her. A few months earlier, Rachel had attended a veteran-led panel at her uncle's request. One of the speakers, a quiet, steady woman with a voice that rasped like gravel, had spoken about dignity, about invisible wounds, about what it meant to advocate for those who didn't always know how to ask. Rachel remembered that woman's name, Elena Marshall. As Elena exited the building, Rachel stood by the elevator, unsure what to do. Then she made a decision, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and opened a saved number, her uncle's friend, a man she'd met only once at a military networking luncheon. She hadn't even spoken to him beyond hello, but she knew who he was. Everyone did. General Marcus Dwyer, she typed quickly. Sir, I believe you need to know something about someone named Elena Marshall. She didn't expect a reply, but 5 minutes later, her phone vibrated. Received. Thank you. I'll take it from here. In a quiet Pentagon office that afternoon, General Dwyer stood staring out the window, the Capitol dome a faint silhouette behind haze. On his desk sat a photograph, a younger version of himself, arm in a sling, standing beside a medic with bandaged hands and a hoarse smile. The desert wind had blown their uniforms dusty that day, but he remembered it vividly, remembered the tourniquet, the pressure of gauze, the whispered words through blood. "You stay with me, sir. You stay right here." He picked up the phone and dialed a number pulled from a forwarded message. The receptionist at Halston Dynamics answered cheerfully, until he gave his name. Yes, General. One moment, I'll transfer you to HR." Shelley Thompson answered seconds later, crisp and composed. "This is Shelley." "Miss Thompson," the general said evenly, "this is General Marcus Dwyer, Department of Defense." There was a pause, just a half beat, but he heard her breath catch. "Yes, sir. How can I understand you just interviewed a woman named Elena Marshall." "Yes, she did come in today, but I'm not sure if she saved my life." Iraq, 2007. With her throat torn open and blood pouring down her collar, she held me together until the evac arrived. "I have use of my arm today because of her. That scar on her neck, that's not a flaw. That's a badge of honor." Another silence. I wasn't aware," Shelley stammered. "We made a hiring decision based on—" "I'm not calling to debate your decision," Dwyer said, voice calm but cold. "I'm calling to inform. I've just forwarded your company's interview transcript and notes to a few friends on the Civilian-Military Partnership Council. Expect questions about your stated values and about what they really look like in practice." And with that, he hung up. Back across town, Elena sat on a weathered bench near the light rail station. She watched pigeons fighting over a paper bag and adjusted her scarf absent-mindedly. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number." She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Marshall?" said a warm, gravelly voice. "Yes. This is General Dwyer. I think you might remember pulling shrapnel out of me during a very bad day in Iraq." Elena let out a short, surprised breath. Half laugh, half memory. "How could I forget?" "I heard what happened this morning," he said. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner, but I'm not calling to fix it." She was silent. "I'm calling," he said gently, "to offer something better." Elena sat very still, phone pressed to her ear, the hum of the city fading behind General Dwyer's words. "I'm calling to offer something better," he had said. She didn't speak right away. Not because she didn't know what to say, she simply didn't trust her voice to hold. Dwyer waited patiently on the other end of the line. "We've just created a new civilian role within the Department of Defense, Veterans Transition Services. It's a hybrid initiative between the DoD and the Department of Labor, focused on fair placement, disability inclusion, and internal HR reform. I want you to apply." Elena blinked. "General, You don't have to prove anything," he said gently. "Just be who you already are." That silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, like the pause between a deep breath and the step forward. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, uneven. "Why me?" "Because you've lived it," he replied. "And because we need people who understand that leadership doesn't always shout. It shows up, and it endures." He gave her a name to contact, an application reference, and a personal note of endorsement he'd already filed. Before he hung up, he added one last thing. "I remember that day in Iraq," he said. "You were bleeding more than I was, but you stayed focused. That wasn't protocol. That was conviction. It's the same thing I heard in your story today. The same thing I think the system needs." Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, fingers grazing the rim of her old ceramic mug, the tea inside long gone cold. Her worn folder lay open in front of her. Resumes, letters of recommendation, a copy of her HR degree. She looked at it all and realized something. She wasn't chasing jobs anymore. She was chasing something bigger. Change, not revenge, not headlines, correction, quiet reform. The next morning she sent in the application. The reply came 3 days later. She was in. Her first day was nothing glamorous, no brass bands, no media flash, just a nondescript office on the third floor of a federal building in D.C., a security badge, and a team of 5 others. All veterans, all from different branches, all carrying different scars. Her job? Oversee a new pilot program training HR departments across federal contractors to identify unconscious bias, particularly toward wounded veterans and disabled candidates. The work was hard, unsexy, and often thankless. It meant reviewing policies line by line, rewriting outdated interview guides, sitting across from executives who talked over her or smiled politely without listening. But she didn't waver. She shared stories, not about herself, but about the people she'd met, the woman who hid her prosthetic hand in photos, the vet who practiced phone scripts because his stutter worsened under pressure, the Marine who was told he looked too intense for hospitality work. Every story added weight. Every seminar she delivered ended with the same line. You're not hiring perfection, you're hiring potential. And scars don't erase that. They prove it. Word began to spread, quietly, internally. Executives who once brushed her off now asked her to lead veteran equity panels. One HR director requested her help in building a more inclusive review process. A mid-sized tech company launched a mentorship initiative with her guidance. She never went back to Halston Dynamics. She never had to, because while they had looked at her and seen a scar, Elena had looked at the world and seen an opportunity, not to be accepted, but to create space for others to be. And in choosing that mission, she became something no rejection could diminish, a force for change. One voice, raspy, soft, and undeniable. Elena didn't post about it. She didn't announce her new role, didn't write a long caption or tag a department hashtag. She simply showed up to work, took notes, and got started. But the world, it had already started paying attention. Unbeknownst to Elena, someone else had never forgotten her. Rachel Linwood, the intern who had sent that message to General Dwyer, couldn't let go of what she'd witnessed in the conference room. The words, the silence, the way Elena had stood there with more dignity in her rejection than most people showed in triumph. A week after Elena left Halston Dynamics, Rachel sat at her desk during lunch, scrolling through LinkedIn. Her finger hovered over the post button for a full minute before she tapped it. No hashtags, no company tags. Just a photo she had taken from the lobby window. Elena standing outside at the crosswalk, the early light catching the soft fold of her scarf. Her folder clutched to her chest, the scar faintly visible beneath her jaw. The caption read, "They saw a scar. She carried a legacy." In less than an hour, the post was shared over 100 times. By evening, it had gone viral. Veteran forums picked it up first, then disability advocates, then mainstream recruiters and HR professionals across industries. The comments poured in by the thousands. "She's my hero. Quiet strength like that humbles me. Every hiring manager needs to read this. I've made judgments I didn't realize. This changed me. I want my daughter to grow up seeing women like this. My scars aren't on my skin, but I've never felt more seen." Journalists started reaching out. Elena declined most interviews. She had no interest in being a symbol. She just wanted to do the work. But one local reporter convinced her on one condition. "No pity headlines," she said. "No close-up of the scar." The article ran under the title, "What Courage Sounds Like." It told her story not in sweeping metaphors, but in steady steps. How she once saved lives under fire, how her voice was taken, but not her purpose. How she was passed over, then quietly lifted up again. The piece resonated beyond expectations. A national HR conference cited it in a keynote on visual bias in hiring. A veteran hiring coalition requested permission to share it in training sessions. One company even rewrote its candidate evaluation forms, adding a simple but powerful question. Were judgments made based on appearance rather than qualifications? Elena read the article only once. Then she folded the page neatly and tucked it into the back of her folder. Behind her degree, behind the letter from General Dwyer, behind the affirmations she still carried on note cards. She never responded to the online buzz, but in her inbox, one message stood out. No sender name, just a short note. "My daughter is 14. She has a birthmark that makes her hide from the world. I showed her your story. She said, maybe I'm brave like that too. Thank you." Elena closed her laptop slowly, hands trembling, not with fear, but with something older, something deeper, the feeling of being understood. And somewhere between the noise and the quiet, between the rejection and the recognition, she realized the story wasn't hers alone anymore. It had become a mirror for others, and the reflection was starting to matter. What began as a single story quickly became a movement, not driven by outrage, but by recognition. Elena's inbox began to fill with messages from people she had never met. Some were short, a line or two. Others, pages long. Veterans, burn survivors, amputees, cancer survivors, single mothers, trauma survivors from all walks of life. Many didn't say much, just, "Thank you," or more quietly, "I thought I was the only one." But it didn't stop at words. In boardrooms across the country, HR directors printed out her story and pinned it to bulletin boards. At a university in Texas, a professor made it required reading for a course on organizational leadership. A regional bank in Illinois changed its hiring policy to allow candidates with vocal impairment to request alternative interview formats. And quietly behind the scenes, something even more significant was happening. General Dwyer stood before a panel at the Department of Veterans Affairs in the Department of Labor. He wasn't there to reprimand the company that rejected Elena. That part was over. What he proposed was bigger, a nationwide interdepartmental initiative, Project Recite. Its mission was simple but powerful: to train hiring managers across federal contractors and private partners to look beyond what they could see, to build a system that could recognize resilience, not just polish. "We train soldiers to see through walls," Dwyer said in his briefing. "It's time our hiring systems learned to see through scars." The initiative was funded. Within 6 months, pilot programs were launched in 5 major cities. Elena wasn't the face of it. She had asked not to be, but her fingerprints were everywhere. The materials she helped write, the empathy-centered interview models she co-designed, the workshop guides that included her favorite quote on the cover, "You're not broken. You are proof that healing is possible." And yet, for all the change unfolding, it was one small envelope that stayed with Elena the longest. There was no return address, just her name in shaky handwriting. Inside, a folded sheet of notebook paper and a photo. A teenage girl with long sleeves, smiling nervously next to a library shelf. The note read, "I wore short sleeves to school today. First time in 5 years. I think I'm finally okay with being seen. Because you were." Elena sat at her table, the note trembling slightly in her hand. She didn't post about it. She didn't tell anyone. She simply opened the drawer of a small wooden box where she kept her quiet things. Letters, old patches, a ribbon she'd been given but never displayed, and gently placed the photo inside. Because she knew now, the scar she once hid had become a bridge, and across it, others were starting to walk. It wasn't the White House or a televised panel that called Elena next. It was a small community college in Maryland, just outside Annapolis. No PR team, no spotlight. Just a handwritten letter from a professor of organizational ethics who had read her story and asked if she might speak to his students. Elena almost said no, not because she didn't care, but because she still wasn't used to being the one in front of the room. She had always preferred the background, the quiet part of the fight. The scar hadn't changed that. If anything, it had deepened her instinct to lead without attention. But something about the simplicity of the invitation moved her. No titles, no photo requests. Just, "Would you be willing to share what it means to lead with truth?" She said yes. The classroom held 23 students. The whiteboard barely worked. One ceiling tile was missing. No microphones, no stage. Elena arrived early. She sat in the back corner and waited while students filtered in. Some carried backpacks slung low. Others yawned into hoodies. A few scrolled their phones without looking up. When the professor introduced her, they clapped, but politely, not because they knew who she was. That was just fine. She stood and walked slowly to the front of the room. Her scarf was neat, as always, but didn't fully cover the curve beneath her jaw. No one stared. No one flinched. She picked up a dry erase marker and wrote across the board, "What does a scar teach us?" Then she turned. Her voice, though damaged, carried clearly. Not loud, but steady. She didn't begin with the war. She didn't mention the general. She didn't even talk about the job rejection. Instead, she talked about moments, small, often invisible ones. The choice to act when afraid, the courage to speak when unheard, the decision to stand when no one applauds. She paused often, not for drama, but to breathe. Each silence had its own weight. Each breath reminded them that strength doesn't always come wrapped in volume. Afterward, a girl from the front row approached her, no older than 19, wearing long sleeves despite the spring warmth. "I have burns," she whispered, "since I was 6. I always thought I had to hide them, to be taken seriously." Elena didn't respond right away. She just reached into her folder and handed the girl a small card she had written weeks earlier. On it were 7 words: "You are not broken, you are proof." The girl stared at it, eyes wide. Elena smiled. No court had ever vindicated her. But in that classroom, something bigger had happened. She had given someone permission to be seen. Elena never framed the letter from General Dwyer. She didn't print the article. She never replied to the viral post or shared her story in a podcast. That had never been the goal. In her small apartment, on a shelf just above her desk, sat a wooden box, simple, unvarnished, with a small brass latch. All inside were folded notes, thank you cards, and photos. None of them were awards. Some weren't even signed. But every one of them carried a piece of the journey. One was from a janitor who had seen her speak at a workplace bias seminar. Another from a mother who said her daughter finally wore a sleeveless dress to church. Most were anonymous, and Elena preferred it that way. She didn't need the world to remember her name. She just needed it to remember the lesson. That dignity isn't always loud. That scars aren't a weakness to manage. They're proof someone survived. That we cannot claim to value courage and then dismiss those who carry its evidence. She never returned to Halston Dynamics. Months after their formal apology, long after the LinkedIn buzz had faded, Elena passed their office building while on her way to consult for a nonprofit. She looked up at the mirrored glass windows and saw herself reflected. Older, quieter, but somehow stronger. She didn't linger. She kept walking. A few blocks later, she came upon a mural being painted on the side of a community center. It featured people with visible marks, prosthetics, birthmarks, surgical scars, burn tissue, painted not with pity but with pride. In the center was the silhouette of a woman, standing tall, a single line beside her. She didn't raise her voice. She raised others. Elena paused, hand instinctively touching the scarf at her throat. Then, as always, she moved on. Quiet, steady, unchanged. But everything behind her was different. And somewhere, maybe in a classroom, a hiring meeting, or a teenage girl's bedroom mirror, someone was looking again, looking deeper, because Elena had taught them how. In a world that moves fast and often forgets the quiet ones, Elena Marshall reminded us of something timeless: that dignity doesn't always come with applause, that true leadership doesn't always raise its voice, and that scars, whether visible or not, tell stories the world needs to hear. Her journey speaks to every veteran who's returned home and felt unseen. It speaks to every older worker who's been told they no longer fit the image. It speaks to anyone who's been passed over, not because they lack skill, but because someone failed to look deeper. Today, we live in a culture obsessed with appearances, but maybe it's time we ask better questions. What if we hired based on character, not polish? What if strength looked like resilience, not perfection? And what if the quietest voice in the room was the one worth listening to? We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been judged for how you looked or how you sounded? Have you ever known someone whose quiet courage changed your life? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might just be the one someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for spending your time with us. If Elena's story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes in grace, honor, and second chances. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, look deeper, always.